Paul, a few hours ago at midnight, the final instalment of the Harry Potter series went on sale to general pandemonium and partying. I would have joined the crowds at Waterson's, but I had up early to interview you. So I don't know how it ends. But if all the previous books are anything to go by, it will contain magical tricks, miracle cures, evil spirits, vengeful lord, serpents, a hero with disciples, the triumph of good and evil, and all manner of unlikely happenings and events. A bit like the Bible, really.
Yeah, I mean, you could well say that, but I don't think that's necessarily true. But I mean, some of the Bible is allegorical. In other words, it's a picture to get across a point, but other parts of the Bible are very much based upon some very important facts of history. And archaeology has actually opened up a wonderful sort of wealth of knowledge in that respect. Can I give you a few examples? For instance, in the Old Testament, it talks about a guy called Ahab, and he was an interesting king. And he got on the wrong side of a certain country, and he put himself in Megiddo, and found that if he was surrounded by this visiting country, he would eventually just die out because he wouldn't be able to get supplies in and so on. And all you have to do is to cut off a water supply, and that's it. He had an amazing thing at Megiddo. They dug a tunnel of 100 meters long underneath the wall, right out to a stream that brought in the water to Megiddo. I've walked down that tunnel. It is absolutely fantastic. It's as straight as a die, and you think, how can people 2,600 years plus ago do a tunnel like that? He survived because he could get water into his city. Another interesting one was when David was defeating the Jebusites in Jerusalem, and they went up this particular fissure of rock underneath ground that came out into the city. And again, I've had the privilege of being able to walk this. And those are just two examples. I can give you many more in the Old Testament that put credibility right back into some of the incidents there. Similar in the life of Jesus as well.
On the Old Testament, you've referred to historical evidence, but it's not the idea that the biblical Old Testament of the world being created in 6 days, 6,000 years ago, a figment of somebody's imagination.
Certainly, but not of the person who inspired the Bible. I mean, that was a figment of the imagination of some bishop, I think, some few hundred years ago, when he was saying, it was created in whatever it was, 4000 BC on the something of December, and so on. Yes, because that really was a misunderstanding of Genesis. The word day in the Old Testament, there are 3 Hebrew words which translate day. One means 24 hours, one is a very special day, the day of the Lord, and the other is a period of time, and it's the Hebrew word for period of time that's used when the recording of creation is made in Genesis 1. And so it really means, and a period of time elapsed and created. Then God created something else. So it's not the instantaneous as we would necessarily think of. And again, people see that as a wonderful picture of creation. Not exactly how it was made, but giving people an understanding of it coming into being through the originator, in other words, the creator. That's the emphasis in Genesis 1 and 2, is that God's behind it. It doesn't tell us how he did it. It just says it came into being. It could have taken millions of years.
The 10 Commandments are a very good code of conduct for regulating society. But then so was King Arthur's code of conduct for his knights at Camelot. So the 10 Commandments could easily have been created by a leader who simply wanted to keep his people in order. So dressed up the story as a word of a supreme entity, but he'd invented for the purpose.
I mean, when you look at the 10 Commandments, if you take them in their two blocks, really, one is talking about relationship with God, one is talking about relationship with humanity. And yes, you could, as you were suggesting, any sort of king wanting to control his populace, as it were, making himself very important. But in actual fact, God's not out to control, he's out to ensure that people enjoy the very best of life. And when you think so many nations have been built on the Ten Commandments, and it's been this sort of foundation for their laws, etc., and it's been a very important basis for many nations. And if there is that, if we actually followed those commandments, say the latter ones in relationship to one another, I don't think we'd have some of the problems that we have in the world today. A lot of them would go away, because often many of the situations that bring wars, etc., disputes, are often through people thinking of themselves rather than other people. And the Ten Commandments pushes out to think about other relationships.
How can you be sure that those commandments were God-given rather than created by an individual?
Moses is there, and he has this experience of God and this wonderful relationship with God. Moses is known as a person who actually communicates with God face to face. Now, whether they've come from God is something that we have to trust, rather than can specifically say, yes, I'm 109% certain they came from God. There's a trust in that. Does it reflect God's character as we see it portrayed in the whole of the Bible? Yes, it does. So you're quite right. We can't categorically say, yes, they came from God, other than it says Moses came down having received these from God. It was an interesting relationship that was built between Moses and God and the people of Israel through the giving of the Ten Commandments, because there was this agreement, and that's why we have the sets of commandments. And you and I think when they came down the mountain with two tablets, that five's on one, five's on the other. Not at all. It's the relation. It's a covenant relationship, an agreement that's being made, where one side of the agreement, God has his set of commandments, the copy, and mankind has the other. Well, you couldn't really leave it with God up the mountain, so he brings it down and puts it in the tent, the holy tent, that represents God's place where he lives. And so that's why he has the two. So there's lots of symbolism there which would indicate that this could well be the thing that happened.
Moving on to the New Testament, the fairy tale aspect of what we're talking about is the Nativity. It's difficult to believe in the virgin birth, or that kings would travel for miles on a whim following a star. I mean, your view on that?
Well, as I understand it, I'm not a biologist, virgin births are not unheard of. They do take place. So it's not totally impossible. They do happen. They are freak, but they do happen, as I understand it from biologists. Again, it's an understanding of the story of the coming of Jesus into the world. It's inspired by God, and it's God who puts that seed, as it were, into Mary and enables her to give birth to his son. And if you think of God as being the creator, brought everything into existence, the virgin birth's not an impossibility. If you come from that stance, it would be quite normal in God's eyes to be able to do that. It's not going to be beyond his power, because when you're dealing with God, he's so much greater than we are, and some of the things he does are sometimes unbelievable. We often want to put God in a box and control him and say, yeah, that's possible, but that's not possible. But if you're God, anything must be possible. And that's the difference, and that's where I think we have the challenge to say, yeah, we have a God who can do the impossible and has done the impossible, gives us those wonderful glimpses, and asks us to put our trust in him for not only our life here, but for eternity.